All right, how many people have checked their email more than 14 times today? And here's what I want to know. This is a burning question in my mind. I'm being serious. You know the track your friends, track your mom, track your phone, all those things. Is this creating a cyber risk for me? This is a real question. I'm tracking my mom because of the situation with my parents, and I'm like, have I just created a cyber risk over all this? You guys think yes or no? No one's answering me. Safety first? So take the risk? Okay. So I guess if someone hacks my phone, they know where my mom is. Maybe that's not all bad. They can help. All right, we're going to switch it up here. We have a fireside chat. You'll see there's only 2 chairs, so I'll be welcoming up our guests in a second. And they both have teenage daughters, so I think data protection is probably something they should think about. Those girls, they got a lot of stuff going on online these days, don't they? Okay, so the topic is data resilience unveiled, a strategic approach to data backup in 2024. And they are going to talk about the critical role of secure backup strategies in fortifying organizations' defenses. And for anyone who heard my keynote this morning about the organization that I'm giving advice to, they have yet to get their data back where they would like it in the format they would like it. So they probably wish they had heard this talk 21 days ago. So you're going to hear a lot of great things from them. Let me introduce. We have Bill Quigley, Partner Solutions Architect at AWS. Welcome, Bill. And Ray Heffer, the Field CISO. What a cool title. I want to be a Field CISO one day. Field CISO at Veeam. And for all of you who came in early this morning and saw the beautiful donuts, you can thank him for that. You sat down too quick for me.
Thank you.
Enjoy your talk.
Thanks. Okay, great. It's good to be here. So you can all see the screen. Perfect. Okay, so quick introduction. My name is Ray Heffer. As you can tell from my accent, I'm based in the US. Haven't always been based in the US. Moved there in 2016. Yes, with my 2 teenage daughters who I'm always hounding about cybersecurity, and they just say, Dad, that's boring. But I'm working on it. I've been in the industry, I think it says 25 years up there. That's just to make me seem a little bit younger. I think it's closer to 27 years. And certainly got some stories to share. Bill, over to you.
Thanks, Ray. My name is Bill Quigley. I am, as you can tell from my accent, based in Seattle, Washington. And I'm a partner solution architect with AWS. I work with ISVs to educate them on how to best utilize AWS resources for ISVs who are in the security, storage, and networking areas. So Ray, can you tell us a little bit about how we got where we are today?
Yeah, so before we talk about these top 3 things, and hopefully this is resonating with you through all the sessions today, I want to just talk about how this all started. You know, certainly for me, in the 90s, cybersecurity wasn't really a word. It was just security. And I had, my responsibility was my firewall, and I had antivirus on the endpoint, the workstations. And then some bits in the middle, I had some web and email filtering. And that was it. That was my life in security. It was pretty easy, I guess. But then the I love you virus happened. In fact, quick show of hands, who was there for the I love you virus? Who remembers that? Okay, good. We got at least half the room. It was in 2000, and my organization got hit by this virus. And I think as a result of that, it just spurred a few things, like just check who the email is from. Don't just click on things. You know, they got an email that says, I love you. There's something attached, and you'd click on it. But this was the days when email was still new, and people were sending funny things around. I remember one video of a guy smashing his keyboard, if you remember that. It was funny, but that was how that virus became successful. The problem is, back then, was the way I tackled that was email filtering. I set up a rule to catch the title of the email, and it was done. We fixed it. We recovered from some backups, but it wasn't a significant event. But look at where we are today.
So where are we today?
Well, ransomware. Yeah, that's a word you hear so many times. Before we get to ransomware, just think, we had an issue. You may have seen the video. There was a congressman in the US, and I associate this with social engineering. He had a phone call, supposedly from his son, saying he'd been in a car accident, and it was a deep fake. It was AI to clone his son's voice. You only need a minute or two's worth of audio now to clone someone's voice. Now, the congressman told his story. There's a video online about this, but a long story short, he ended up paying thousands of dollars to what he thought was to his son's lawyer to pay the bail, to get him out of jail for something that never happened. And then it was only after the fact he had a call from his son saying, "Dad, I'm fine. What are you talking about?" And we may be talking about ransomware today, but there's all these other things going on that I think that's just enhancing the toolkit of the threat actor. More sophisticated phishing emails, more sophisticated social engineering. And that's something that concerns me. Gone are the days when I had my firewall rules and an email filter to worry about. But then we have threat actors carrying out ransomware attacks, but let's just unravel that for a minute. I'm a big fan of trends and reports and research, which you'll see if we've got some slides on this. And last year, Mandiant released their M-Trends report. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. They typically announce and go over the M-Trends statistics during RSA, so in May they'll surely talk about the new one. One of the metrics I like to track is dwell time. And dwell time is the time it takes for a threat actor to remain on the environment, on the network, undetected before they're detected. And last year it came down from 21 days, this is a global average, to 16 days. But that's still 16 days there in the environment. But what we're actually seeing as well in reality, that report isn't specific to ransomware. It's not even specific to data breaches. There's other reports for that. IBM do a fantastic report called The Cost of a Data Breach. But when we look at what's actually happening here, the threat actor there's actually multiple threat actors. You will have someone gain initial access, and they may have hundreds of credentials and RDP sessions available, and they may sit on that for a month, 2 months, could even be 6 months, and then decide, I'm going to sell this on a marketplace, on the dark web, on a breach forum somewhere, and they will sell access for perhaps a few $100s, a few $1,000s, depending on how the scale of that. And I hate to say it, it's then the script kiddie coming along. I'll buy that access. I'm going to do some ransomware today. And this is what we're seeing. And then ransomware, look at Lockbit 3.0. It's ransomware as a service. It's crazy. I've even heard the support is very good. So, this is what we're up against today. So I wanted to just set that scene of why we're bringing this up, these 3 items up. So the top 3 things we have, first off, the strategic integration of data protection and incident response. This is about, in fact, I'm going to ask a question. Who today has incident response runbooks? Perhaps they do tabletop exercises. I'll talk more about that in a moment. That integrates the existing security teams, the SOC teams, but also IT operations for backup and recovery. Anyone doing that today? Okay, we've got a few. And this is what this point is about. We see this is siloed. Backup is traditionally seen as the IT thing, isn't it? Backup and recovery. Back in the day, I restored a backup because the AC failed and corrupted some data. That was what it was for. But threat actors are targeting our backups as part of the ransomware attack. Gone are the days where they're missing that. That's certainly part of their playbook. And when we look at our incident response playbooks, what we've seen is, not everyone, but some organizations, it's very focused on the security teams, but we need to bring the whole organization into that as well, and part of that is the IT operations guys. There's some capabilities, which I'll touch on in a minute, that they can bring into that. And then the other point on this one, tabletop exercises. CISO do some templates on ransomware. They actually have a huge list of templates for doing a tabletop exercise. So I'm a bit of a geek. I like fantasy fiction and Dungeons and Dragons. It's essentially that. It's a Dungeons and Dragons role-playing game turned into ransomware is happening in the organization, and it's a really amazing opportunity to bring teams from all over the organization, not just IT, not just security teams, but finance and human resources, into what we're going to do when this actually happens. And then the second point here, bridging the gap between IT, cybersecurity through governance, risk management, and compliance. And I was actually quite pleased to see in the last session, the NIST cybersecurity framework was mentioned. We have the new version 2, being finalized as we speak. But even the existing CSF framework, recover is a critical pillar there. Being able to recover the data is a key part of that. But as we look into version 2, we have that new govern pillar. So this is where we really, you've heard this before, is cybersecurity needs to be a business enabler. And I've heard that and think, great, but how? How do I do that? And the way I see it is through governance risk, compliance frameworks like zero trust. CISO have a zero trust maturity model. And I really like that in terms of enabling the business, because I see it as almost like a map or a way of navigating where you are and where you need to get to. They have 5 pillars. Starts at the user, the device they're interacting with, the apps they're using, and then the network, and then the final pillar is data. And that's, again, where data resilience comes in. And the final one here for number 3, protective ransomware defense and recovery readiness. This is something I see, I mentioned the tools that the threat actor has in their arsenal, but what about us as the defenders here? So, for example, if we are backing up our business-critical data, and by the way, the backup software is touching the business-critical data, because if it wasn't being backed up, then it's probably not business-critical, I'd argue to say. Imagine now we have capabilities in there to detect malware at the time of the backup. Now, sure, we have tool fatigue. I get it. We're limited in people and resources, and adding more technology and tools is not the answer. But if we're using existing tools and capabilities that we have, doing our backups, and we have the ability to detect malware, for example, as part of that backup, it's just that extra tool in our kit for recovery readiness there. Okay, 2024 data protection slide, Bill. Do you want to touch on this?
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about how public cloud applies to this situation. First, another show of hands. Who remembers the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack from, I think, 2021? Interesting for a couple of reasons. One is, if you really want to hit Americans hard, keep them from putting gas in their cars. But the interesting thing in this context is that the pipeline itself didn't shut down. The attack impacted the billing systems in the front end. The pipeline was controlled by SCADA systems, which, if you've ever worked with utilities, you understand that those systems are typically air-gapped. Public cloud gives you a virtual air-gapped environment. There are many fewer threat vectors that can impact your data when it's sitting in the public cloud. So I obviously work for AWS. I want you to use AWS as your public cloud provider. But you know what? If you already have a contract with another cloud provider, use them. Just get at least one copy of your backup data out of your data center. I do want to mention that AWS is, I believe, still the only public cloud provider with 2 full regions in Canada. We have a region in Montreal, and just last quarter, we opened up a new region in Calgary, and that actually has an impact on latency, because Canada is a big country, and it also has an impact on data sovereignty. Can you talk about that for a minute, Ray?
Yeah, so data sovereignty, coming from Europe and the UK, that's actually a big thing. I used to work with cloud providers. I'm not talking of the giants like AWS, but the smaller cloud providers that would use AWS for regions that they don't have a data center presence in. And in Europe, data sovereignty is actually a key, it's a very hot topic. Obviously, there's GDPR. UK has UK GDPR, and obviously in the US, there's the California Privacy Protection Act, and Canada has its own privacy regulations as well. But what I'm looking at is more of a forecast, like where Europe has come from is absolutely critical where data is being stored, and organizations obviously using the cloud to have a presence in regions they wouldn't typically have access to. And from a cloud provider perspective, that was amazing because they didn't have to open their own facilities, but they could give customers access where they need to contain their data. But I do predict, and I'm happy to be wrong, that the US and Canada, I think we're going to see more of this. So the locality of data is really important, yeah, for sure.
one other thing I wanted to mention is latency. It's another consequence of where you put your data. And to go back to the colonial attack, the company actually paid the ransom, and they got the keys to decrypt their data. That decryption process was so slow that they ended up restoring from their backups anyway. So you want this data out of your data center, but you still want relatively quick access to it, because the backup is your last backstop to defend or to recover from an attack.
And they'll be lucky if they can, even if they get the decryption key, and typically what we see is they'll get some, I call it janky, this script that kind of works, and then what state's that data going to be in anyway? And then back to the backup again. So yeah, that's very true. Okay, so we're not going to just read off these slides. This is a discussion, but think of this as a backdrop to something here. So 75% suffered ransomware events. I'm not a betting man, but if I were, I would bet that all of them, I'll go as far as saying, the backups were targeted. Now, going back to those tools in the arsenal here that we've got, so, okay, we can detect malware at the time of the backup, great. But we also need to have immutable backups. Back to that CIA triad and the integrity piece. We need to make sure that hasn't been touched and hasn't been tampered with. So mutability, wherever you're backing up, whether that's locally to the cloud, wherever it is having that untouchable backup that is not going to be, that you've got frameworks like Zero Trust in place before that, but also technically that backup can't be touched as well. I think that's a key point.
So let's do one more show of hands. As you can see from this slide, lots of people are testing, probably not as many as need to. I think that there's maybe a little bit of fibbing in the response here, because I think the proportion of respondents who haven't done a test is probably a lot higher than 1%. But let's see, how many people here have done a full-scale recovery test within the last year? Okay, so that's really more what I sort of expected. So the one point I want to make is that the public cloud provides you with a really great area to do this kind of testing. It can give you a safe, isolated sandbox environment, and so you can actually run these tests, use these public cloud resources, and then stop paying for them when the test is finished. So one more question I have is, as a CISO, do you actually know what your infrastructure team's requirements or targets are for RPO and RTO? And Ray, how do we even get to the point where a CISO needs to know what RPO and RTO are?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. I'm not sure if I have the answer, because we have the recovery point objective, recovery time objective. These are metrics that IT operations teams have known about for decades. And on the security side, we have things like mean time to respond or mean time to detect an attack. So we have these metrics, but I'm curious, and perhaps this is a discussion we can have afterwards. Is there somewhere in the middle that we need to be? I'm talking about this collaboration between different parts of the organization, typically IT operations and our security teams. But is the CISO tracking all of those metrics? What matters? Do we need to have something in the middle? Honestly, I don't know the answer. Maybe there's a new metric to be invented, and I don't want to fatigue things even more. But that's a key point, because when you think back of all the stuff we talked about, we have threat actors potentially gaining initial access, and you don't know about it for months. It could be weeks, could be months. You can't just think, oh, I'm going to go back to a backup 6 months ago anymore. That doesn't make sense. We're going to lose so much of our business critical data. So again, having that immutability and knowing when the last clean backup was is important. So other tools that security teams you'd be more than familiar with, things like Yara rules, we have the capability to look in there, when was the last clean backup? But as far as metrics are concerned, I still see these in disparate camps, but I'm open to discussion on that later on.
And let me bring up one more point about the public cloud, which is that passive scanning only goes so far, right? Yara rules can do a great job at detecting if there are known signatures in your backup data, but these days, sophisticated attackers need to be detected with behavioral methods. And so again, the public cloud provides a very safe place for you to set up this environment. You can run these applications. They're not interacting with your enterprise or the outside world, and yet you can still do behavioral analysis on what's going on, and then again, discard it all and shut it down if it's going to reinfect your on-premises environment.
Nation states, I haven't mentioned yet, but I actually want to throw this one out there, because I talked about threat actors gaining initial access. It's sold on a marketplace, but we haven't talked about nation states. They're not doing that. They're not sitting in environment for 6 months. Once they gain access, they're active. Just a quick show of hands. Are nation states more of a concern to you than the script kiddie? I'm assuming not. It's going to be the low-hanging fruit here, the ransomware as a service. So quick show of hands, ransomware as a service. Who's concerned about that happening in your organization today? Okay. Yeah, nation states is something we need to keep an eye on, because as these become more sophisticated with AI, I'm sure they're keeping an eye on that as well. And I say to my daughters, I've got a code word now. So if you get a phone call from me, ask me what the code word is if it sounds suspicious. And again, I'm not sure if they're going to do that, but I'm trying my best. Okay. Just to wrap up, anything you want to say on this, Bill? Or should we, just conscious of time, I want to cover the key takeaways here. I'm going to skip ahead. Okay. I just wanted to circle back to what we started with in the beginning, but turn these 3 CISO thought points into key takeaways. So the first one, we really believe that it is that integration of security teams with incident response and IT operations is critical. It's absolutely essential to data resilience. And then secondly, leveraging frameworks such as NIST CSF, which obviously builds on this recover pillar already that's been around for a long time, but now adds govern. Use these as tools to enhance and enable the organization. And then finally, ransomware readiness is not about adding more technology and more tools. It's about doing more with less and doing more with what you have in the existing environment. I think for security teams, if we just give them a bunch of new technology, it's just more noise. Whereas if we have these capabilities to use YARA rules, to do inline malware detection, all this stuff we can do on the backup software that's touching our most business-critical data, it's just that one step further to preparedness of ransomware defense. So we've got about 2 minutes left before we wrap up. Are there any questions? It's hard to see as well. Okay, we've got a question at the back. That's okay, a mic is on the way.
So you mentioned, I'm trying to connect 2 dots. So immutable backups, completely agree, essential. You made a comment at the outset that attackers, threat actors, you would bet that they attack the backups at all times in organizations. So if you have immutable backups, what is the vulnerability for that? When I'm telling the board or my leadership that immutable backups is going to be the savior, am I now at risk even that the immutable backup is in danger?
Yeah, so what is happening with immutable backups is that all of the backup providers are storing this data in some repository. And sophisticated actors are deliberately targeting these environments. And so and it doesn't really matter who your backup vendor is, if someone gets into your backup server and starts just randomly deleting objects, it doesn't matter if it's on premises or in any of the public cloud vendors, if they just start deleting things, then they're going to corrupt backups. Every time I hear about somebody paying a ransom, I die a little bit inside, because it means that whoever is affected by that, they just weren't doing backups appropriately. And one of the last levels of protection is to make sure that no one can erase this data. With AWS, as with the other providers, if you turn on immutability, you turn it on for a specific period. Typically, it's the same period as your short-term backups, tends to be around 30 days. During that time, no one, not even the root account, can delete the objects that are in that backup. So even if your credentials are compromised, that data still remains. After that period is up, most of the software vendors, for example, Veeam, will start to clean things up in the back end to keep your bill down. But if backups are your sort of last bastion for recovery, then make sure that they cannot be compromised.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I know this is coming up towards the end of the day, and yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for hanging in there with us.